Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. And also by the generous support of listeners like you who choose to support us at Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Patreon.com/trifles. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the Greek interpreter interpreted, the Norwood builder built, and the Reigate squires puzzled, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
How many disguises did Sherlock Holmes use? What were the street Arabs? And how did he get information from his underground network?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 287, Sherlock Holmes and Advertising. Hello there, and welcome to Trifle, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the details about Sherlock Holmes. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
Oh, just as advertised. I love that. I was hoping it would be you.
Yes, and I beat as I sweep as I clean and contain lanolin.
You're the next best thing to Mr. Clean.
Yeah.
All right. Well, quick ad from us just to remind you if you'd like the show notes for this episode, and there will be links, so stay tuned for that. Find them at ihose.co/trifles287. That's all lowercase, ihose.co/trifles287. That'll take you to the SherlockHolmesPodcast.com website, or you can just look in the show notes of the app where you are listening to us right now. That'll also give you an opportunity to poke around. Maybe you want to email us. You can find us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. You can connect with us on social media, where we are at iHearOfSherlock on all of those sites. And most importantly and relevant for this episode, you can become a patron of our show. If you become a patron, it means you support us financially, and depending on what level you choose to support, we actually have some rewards for you. One thing that every single patron is eligible for, regardless of your level of support, is a monthly drawing. At the end of every month, we do a drawing to give out some back issues of the Baker Street Journal. And stay tuned, because this month's drawing has a very specific and relevant back issue of the Baker Street Journal. And at the end of every quarter, we also do a drawing to determine who from among our patrons is eligible for a free subscription to the Baker Street Journal. So that'll lead you to enjoying the Baker Street Journal in the present day. Good luck with that. Well, here at Trifles, we like to kind of look into all of the corners and the nooks and crannies of the Sherlockian canon. And of course, if you know the advertising world, you know that nooks and crannies are associated with Thomas's English muffins. But we're not here to talk about English muffins. We are, in fact, here to talk about advertising. As a matter of fact, we were inspired by an old piece of scholarship that's kind of buried. You don't find it in too many easily accessible places. And we'd like to tell you a little bit about the organization for which it was written and the publication for which it was written, and about the individual who wrote it. So, Bert, where would you like to begin if I gave you those two options to start with?
Oh, I think we should start with the organization. It's the 5 Orange Pips of Westchester County, an organization that was organized in 1934. And so it predates, actually, the rise of the Baker Street Irregulars. And in 1955, the Pips published a book called The Best of the Pips, which was a collection of their scholarship in which this paper was included. And there was an appearance of this paper in another version, which, we can mention in a little while. But the lovely thing about this is its association with the 5 Orange Pips of Westchester County, which still goes today. In fact, Don Pollock, among other people, are members of the 5 Orange Pips of Westchester County. And Don, I think, led the production of another volume, another collection of their scholarship called Papers on the Sundial, which I think is still available, which came out in 2020.
Papers on the Sundial. That's an interesting one. I had missed that one. What I do have in my hand is the 1999 Baker Street Journal Christmas Annual called The Best of the Pips, Volume 2, More Papers on the Sundial, which was edited by Al Rosenblatt.
Oh, right.
So, and as a matter of fact, stay tuned for our drawing, because this is the back issue that we have available to give away. You don't see too many Christmas annuals from the Baker Street Journal from prior years, so stay tuned to that. Now, just a quick question for you, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, about the 5 Orange Pips. I know it is a very small group, and typically they gather at the home of one of the members to have a dinner and read their papers together, which is where this volume, The Best of the Pips, came from. Do you know, though, Bert, do they cap their membership at 5 individuals? Is that how it works?
Oh, I don't think so, but then I don't know. John Lellenberg had been a member of that organization in the past. Mm-hmm. John Linsenmeyer, I believe, also was or is a member. And Al Rosenblatt. Yeah. So I would suspect they do not, but I do not have any real knowledge.
I don't know.
I'm completely ignorant about that.
Mike Whalen, the former head of the Baker Street Irregulars, was a member at one point. Of course, he lived in Maryland and then in Indianapolis, so he had to travel a bit to do that. Because usually these were people like around the New York area. They say are of Westchester County. But just, I know we're getting into the nitty gritty, the history here. Maybe some people aren't interested in that. But Edgar Smith, who was head of the BSI from 1940 to 1960, was a member of the 5 Orange Pips as well. And you can imagine these times when these men, and it was all men at the time, would gather and, enjoy dinner, brandy, cigars, etc., and then read these papers. So it's interesting to see these papers in printed form, and I would imagine they were printed when they were reading them to each other at the table. But you can also imagine the back and forth, the guffaws, the commentary that probably accompanied each reading at those 5 Orange Pips meetings.
I think it would be odd enthusiasm, shock and awe over the brilliant scholarship, yes. I would think, rather than guffaws.
Well, in this case, Sherlock Holmes and Advertising, it was written by Thayer Cummings. And incidentally, I have another book by Thayer Cummings, also printed by the 5 Orange Pips. It's a thin volume, and it's called 7 on Sherlock. And these are all 7 pieces that Thayer Cummings put together. So it's a nice little volume. And it also includes the advertising thing. But Thayer Cummings was an advertising executive. He was a madman of that era. He lived from 1904 to 1989. And it was an executive at BBDO. For those of you who know the advertising industry, one of the big ad agencies is BBDO, which, I mean, you and I, Bert, have had plenty of experience in the communications and marketing business. BBDO in the industry is informally known as "Bring it back, do it over." I don't know if you ever heard that one.
Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah, but it actually stood for Batten, Barton, Durstein, and Osborne. So not too different when you think about the TV show Mad Men and Sterling Draper as it evolved from the 50s into the 60s. And that's when Thayer Cummings was active. I think he was in 1951. He was made a director of BBDO in recognition of his handling of the American Tobacco Company account. How appropriate for a Sherlockian.
That's right. Insert coughing sound effect here.
Exactly. But
that was just after Don Draper left, I think, the agency to go over to Sterling Draper.
I think you're right. You're right. And then Cummings retired from BBDO in 1963.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, this is a great paper, and it also appeared, Sherlock Holmes in Advertising, it also appeared in a different form in October 1946 in the Baker Street Journal, Volume 1, Number 4, in the old series. And it's a shorter paper, but this is from the version printed in the 1955 book, which is a little bit more complete and a little bit more, even a little bit more charming. And I should mention that, among other things, Thayer Cummings, among his interesting life, had a quite close brush with the Titanic disaster. His father and mother were traveled on the Titanic, and only his mother came back in 1912. So when he was 8 years old, his father was lost in the sinking of the Titanic.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I didn't realize that. And these are facts you can find out about Thayer Cummings and other early irregulars, Baker Street irregulars, in the book Aboriginals by Harrison, otherwise known to us as Terry Hunt, and Linda Hunt. We will have a link to all of these publications in the show notes so you can take a look. Yeah. So when it comes to advertising, what's really interesting to me is that he latches onto not necessarily the full-page print ads that we think of today, the circulars and the big image-based advertisements. Those were later developed. Even in Thayer Cummings' time, advertising was very copy-heavy. To be a copywriter in advertising was everything. Well, when Sherlock Holmes came up against advertising and perhaps used advertising, and we'll talk about that, it was completely text-based. This is essentially the agony column that we hear about.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Small little bits of information, just a sentence or two, inserted into very dense columns of text in the daily newspapers.
Yeah, and when you think about classified advertising and advertising in papers in general, it's something that is not really practiced anymore. It's something that a modern audience in 2022 really would not be familiar with unless you lived through it. And Cummings actually has a bit of history here. He says, for the record, it may be noted that classified advertising in London dates from 1666, when the London Gazette printed the first advertising supplement after the Great Fire. And the paper was swamped with notices of goods lost or found and changes of business address caused by the disaster. So ever since, papers all over the world have been printing these small, tightly packed advertisements, as Holmes realized well, and they're probably as genuine a mirror of the comedy and misery of living in the time as anything to be found in the news columns. And these are essentially classified ads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lovely bit of information that Thayer Cummings gives us there. He starts his paper by saying, I was leafing through some back issues of the Times, and then he gives us all the names of many of the different organizations that Sherlock Holmes has had contact with. He mentions the Morrison, and Dodd, whom we've talked about, some of the businesses that we've talked about in our most recent Trifles episode. But he doesn't mention Sherman the Bird Stuffer, but he does mention the Westaway Agency, and he talks a little bit about Gelder and Company, manufacturers of masonry, statuary, and plaster of Paris. and concerts that are advertised. And he says, we've learned early on, for example, in Adventure of the Copper Beeches, Watson tells us Holmes had been silent all morning, dipping continuously into the advertisement columns of a succession of papers, and that Holmes keeps a scrapbook of outstanding advertisements. And of course, in The Engineer's Thumb, he finds, Thayer Cummings tells us, this advertisement lost on the 9th inst. Mr. Jeremiah Haling, age 26, a hydraulic engineer, left his lodgings at 10 o'clock at night and has not been heard of since. So our advertising, can be instrumental in Holmes's cases, like The Engineer's Thumb.
Now, I have to take issue with that. I mean, how could Holmes have known a year before that an advertisement for a lost hydraulic engineer would be important to retain? I mean, that's a bit of a stretch. Once again, we come up to the bat shark repellent solution that Sherlock Holmes and his utility belt seems to surface at any moment's notice. Well, let's get back to Holmes and how he used advertisements as ways to help him draw in suspects and solve crimes right after this quick word. The Baker Street Journal was first published in 1946, and its old series extended through 1949. It picked up again in 1951 and has been publishing ceaselessly every quarter since then. Every issue of the BSJ is packed with top-notch papers that reflect the sensibilities of Sherlockians from throughout the world. They might be scholarly in nature, giving us details on an aspect of Victorian life that maybe we weren't aware of. They might be tongue-in-cheek, that approach to the game where we wink at each other as we acknowledge Dr. Watson as the true author of the stories and try to figure out some inconsistency. Or they might be something that we never thought was related to Sherlock Holmes, and the author brings it all together for us. Whatever the approach, they're all represented in the Baker Street Journal. Plenty of varying opinions and researches on the world of Sherlock Holmes. Make sure you get on the subscription list to get your copy of the Baker Street Journal delivered to your mailbox every quarter by going to BakerStreetIrregulars.com today. All right, we are back, and we're going to talk all about Sherlock Holmes and his use of advertisements in the detecting business. Now, as we get into the very first example of Holmes using an ad to help him nab someone, which was in the very first story, Thayer Cummings says one wonders if Holmes's lively interest in want ads may not have originally been touched off by an item of curiosa he happened to spot while in the business of analyzing the preservation of an early Egyptian mummy. This item was, in fact, still is, the oldest surviving advertisement in the world. A want ad exhumed from the ruins of Thebes, in which the owner of an Egyptian plantation requests the return of a runaway slave. This ad, more than 3,000 years old, printed on papyrus, is still where Holmes would have spotted it, in the British Museum. So, as Holmes was near the British Museum in his early days, fresh out of university, it's not unlikely that he was there. And of course, shortly thereafter, we find Holmes and Watson teaming up for the very first time in A Study in Scarlet. And this is where Holmes tries his hand at using the agony column for finding something. And what was he looking for in this case?
He placed the following copy in the found column. He writes, "In Brixton Road this morning, a plain gold wedding ring. Found in the roadway between the White Hart Tavern and Holland Grove. Apply Dr. Watson, 221B Baker Street, between 8 and 9 this evening." And the advertisement is immediately successful. This is the first ad in the Canon, the very first case of Sherlock Holmes, and it brings to their rooms a very old and wrinkled woman, Although she identifies herself as Mrs. Sawyer, Holmes later says, because she's vanished, that she must have been a young man, and an active one too, besides being an incomparable actor. But we never really learned for sure who that impersonator was.
But that is indeed the thing that sets Holmes on the trail and knows that he is looking for someone to whom a wedding ring is important. And it puts the relationship at the center of this mystery.
Yeah. And it's just one of a series of ads that percolate through the Sherlock Holmes stories. Cummings, in his paper, reports a comment that I just found charming by Christopher Morley. Cummings writes, Holmes shows himself peculiarly intuitive about what Christopher Morley calls the art of oblique solicitation. Isn't that nice? The art of oblique solicitation and the sign of 4 when he's hot on the trail of the Sholto gang and Mordecai Smith's steam launch. And Watson says, could we advertise? But Holmes says, oh, no. And he compiles an advertisement that for all the world appears that the ad was naturally placed by Mordecai Smith's worried wife.
This is fascinating, and it strikes me as a consultant. Maybe I should try oblique solicitation for my new business development process. It seemed to work for Holmes.
Yeah,
this is
solicitation.
This is of course, the want ad for Mordecai Smith and his steam launch, the Aurora. And then it's described, and of course that's where we get Captain Basil, and all the rest there in the sign of 4. We get to the Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, and this is probably one of the most famous instances of Holmes using the papers to his advantage. After the Blue Carbuncle turns up in the goose, Holmes realized that whoever put it there probably would be looking for it, and he dictates an ad. Oh, no, he writes out the copy. It says, found at the corner of Goodge Street, a goose and a black felt hat. Mr. Henry Baker can have the same by applying at 6:30 this evening at 221B Baker Street. And then he tells the commissionaire, Peterson, to run it to the advertising agency and place it in all the evening papers. And then he rattles off about a half dozen papers that he thinks it should go in.
Oh. And we never hear from Peterson again, do we, in the canon?
No.
Does he ever come back?
Well, I would think that he would come back for the reward for finding the gem. We don't know that the gem actually made it back to the Countess of Morcar, though. That's an interesting part.
Oh, that's true. Well, but Peterson is the commissionaire who just places the ad. He's not. Mm-hmm. Oh, was that the same fellow who brings the goose to Holmes in the Oh, okay. I forgot.
Yeah, because Henry Baker fled when he saw Peterson, thinking he was a police officer, and he picked up the hat and the goose.
Well, I think Peterson got his share of the reward and never bothered to do any more commissionaring at Baker Street again.
Probably not. He was making all of his money in running advertisements down to the agency for people.
But it's nice, too.
He was a media buyer. He was the first media buyer we have in the Sherlockian canon.
That's right. He started a new profession because Holmes tells Peterson, run the copy in the Globe, the Star, Pell Mell, St. James Gazette, Evening News, Standard, Echo, and then says, and any others that occur to you.
See? He was a media buying agent. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then when Baker shows up, Holmes admonishes him. He said, about the hat and about the goose. Holmes says, we've retained these things for some days because we expected to see an advertisement from you, giving your address. I'm at a loss to know why you did not advertise.
And that's fascinating because in saying that, what Holmes tells us, the readers of the 21st century, is that running ads, running a classified ad, running something in the agony column, was commonplace, just as common as, someone going onto Facebook and asking for the quote-unquote hive mind to help out, or someone tweeting something out or sharing something on Instagram now. It was just as commonplace as those things are.
Right, absolutely.
But Henry Baker, of course, didn't have the pence to handle placing those ads, so he just kind of hoped they would turn up.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then in the adventure of the Bruce Partington plans, another 2-line personal is in the agony column of the Daily Telegraph. And of course, the genius of Sherlock Holmes here is to tap words and phrases already used successfully, as he's deduced by the schemers. The ad runs tonight, same hour, same place, 2 taps. Most vitally important, your own safety at stake. Pierrot.
And, this is really a masterstroke because, again, here, less is more. And what Holmes has done is he has studied the previous messages, and he has become an expert copywriter in the style of, in this case, the client, Pierrot, or Oberstein, in this case, and has made it such that it appeared as if he was Colonel Valentine Walter on the other end, writing these messages.
Yeah. And then when we actually find Colonel Walter in Holmes' power, Walter writes a letter to Oberstein, and it brings in the villain. And this is the point that Thayer Cummings makes here. He says, Holmes excels in timing. Being abnormally perceptive of human behavior, he seems to have a God-given instinct as to exactly when and where to run his copy, perhaps more than any one other thing. Says Thayer Cummings, the executive from BBD&O, good timing is the secret of Holmes' success with advertising.
And of course, we promised you that we would go into our Patreon subscriber base here and do our little drawing. So which drawing would you like to do first, Bert? Should we do the 1999 BSJ Christmas Annual back issue, or should we do the annual subscription to the Baker Street Journal?
Oh, let's do the back issue.
The back issue. Okay. I'm going to pull out the prize wheel and give it a spin. Let's go around. Land magically on number Chris Moreland. Congratulations. All right, Chris, we will send you a copy of the 1999 Christmas Annual, so stay tuned for that. And now we're going to give it another spin for our Baker Street Journal annual subscription. And that goes to, all right, number 25. Let me see what number 25 corresponds to on our number here. That is Julie Nicodemus. Julie, congratulations. We will make sure you get your copy of the BSJ. And just a reminder, if you would like to be part of this drawing next month and next quarter, be sure to go to patreon.com/trifles or simply check out the Patreon link in our show notes. For as little as $1 a month, you can support the show and be eligible for this drawing. Good luck. And that is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
Just nip down to the advertising agency and have this put in all the evening papers.
Which one, sir?
The Globe, Star, Pall Mall, St. James Gazette, Echo, Evening News, Standard, and all the others that may occur to you.
Right away, sir.